In this video, we learn how to use Retrofit to insert an item in our API and update an item to API. This is a third video about Retrofit. Create a new activity and name it add node activity. Go to layout of this activity. In this layout, we want an edit text. So user put the node title, an edit text for a node description, and a switch for user to check if the node or checklist is done or not. We also add a button, so user if user clicks on this button, we send this node to our server, and server adds this node. Now go to add node activity. First define or to edit text or switch and or button. Now get a reference of them. And create a challenge event for our button. Inside this challenge event, first create our node that we want to send to our API. We want to set 3 of its parameters. We use the text of edit text title, the text of edit text description, and the checked or unchecked of our switch. Now that we created our node object, we create a method insert node to API and pass our node. Now we create this method. To use this method, we use our service and our service builder that we created in last video and our first video in this series. Create a service of type iService and use service builder that build service and pass iService.class. Or request we want to use insert node method, which returns a call of type node. Use service.insert node and pass our node. Now we use request.enqueue and we override two methods. If the request is with failure, we want to show user that the request failed. And if request sent to server and server returned a response, we first search if response is successful and then show a toast to user and close this activity and go back to our main activity. Before we run the app, go to main activity. We set a challenge event for our float injection button. So we go to our add node activity. Now run the app. If we go to add node activity and set a title, description, and checked or unchecked and press add node, we can see that node 7 inserted. Now we want to update a node, and if we search on our server in NodesDB, we can see that node 7 is added. Now we want to update a node. First, we go to our node recycler adapter, and when user clicks on an raw node, we want to pass the ID of that node to our add node activity. We create an intent and add an extra to this intent with the key ID extra and use node touched ID. And because we want to start an activity from outside an activity, we set a flash to this intent, activity new task, and we use context dot start activity. Now go to add node activity. First, define a variable of type int and name it ID extra. If the ID extra is equal to 0, we know that the user come to this activity to insert a node, and if not, we know that user come to this activity to update a node. We also create a node object. Now inside the onCreate method, we get ID extra, search if it exists. We get this ID extra and put it in our ID extra variable. And if an ID extra exists, we know that it is update, and we want to set the button text to be update node instead of add node. And we want to get the node from our API, the node with this ID. So we create this get node from API and pass our ID extra, and now we want to create this method. To create this method, we use about the same codes. You create our service and return the call of type node. Use service.getNode. And pass our ID extra. And we can increase this request. If request is failed, we show user that request failed. And if request succeeded and response returned, search if response successful. And if response successful, our node is in response.body, is in our responses body. And search if node is not null. We want to set already text title, description, and our suite. Initialize them with values that in this node. Now we get our node. It's time to update the node. Inside our button glitch event or add button glitch event, first search if ID extra equals to 0. We know that it is an insert method, so we use the insert node to API. Else we know that it is an update method. We call a method. First search set our node ID. Next we call a update node to API and pass our ID extra and node. Now we create this method. First create our service, use our service. Now use a service.update node and it returns a call of type node. And pass or ID extra and node. Now inquire this request. If it is failed, we want to show users that request failed. And if request succeeded and server respond, we first check if response is successful. And if response successful, we show user that response is successful. And we go back to our main activity. Now run the app. If we click on Note 1, we can change its title and description. And if we press Update Note, the Note 1 changes to Note 8. And if we go to our server and refresh notes, we can see that Note 1 changes to Note 8. Thank you for watching.